Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast. I am your host, JT Olson. Our co host, Garrett Ballard, is still adjusting to a new work schedule. We hope to have him back soon. But the NFL season never rests. Even the off season, it's almost more eventful than the regular season. And that has certainly been the case for the Bucs this year, which a week ago I would have told you would be extremely surprising. The Bucs had the worst cap situation in the NFL. They were over $50 million over the cap, and they've been cutting players. They said goodbye to Leonard Fournette. They said goodbye to Donovan Smith. People who were a big part of the Super Bowl team. They've had to part ways with. They've had to do a lot of restructuring. They've had to trade players like Shaq Mason. So the Bucs have worked really hard just to barely get their heads above water. And what do? The second they get that little breath of fresh air, that little bit of wiggle room just to squeak over cap compliance, they spend like crazy. Which I don't know why I ever doubt Jason Light at this point. He and the front office with Mike Greenberg, they just make the impossible possible when it comes to managing the cap. Because a week ago, it looked like we were going to lose Jamel Dean. He was going to get a big contract on the open market, and the Bucs just didn't have the cap space to pay it. They found a way. Jamel Dean was their first big signing, and it made a lot of noise around the league. I know up here in Michigan, Detroit radio, they were talking about it because Dean was someone who was very much on the radar here. It was unexpected. Everyone thought the Bucs were going to reload. They had to bring fresh legs in here. They had to bring in new guys. They had to balance their budget this year. And they did. They got too cap compliant. But the way they instantly spent, where I still don't even fully understand where the money has come from, it was shocking. Absolutely shocking. But, for a guy like Jamel Dean, who had a really good year last year, he's a homegrown talent. He's an incredible athlete. He's a guy who has shown the ability to take the ball away. That's the kind of guy you want to spend on. That's the kind of guy you want to, break the bank a little bit for. I mean, the contract wasn't crazy. I think it was 4 years, $52 million. So I think it was something in that ballpark, 14 a year-ish. And, it's a big price tag, but it's for a big-time player. And honestly, it changes what this Buccaneers defense looks like. Because you were looking at really only having Carlton Davis and Antoine Winfield on contract. And that was it, really, for the secondary. Don't talk to me about Zion McCollum because he has a long way to go. He is completely unproven at this point. So he is not someone you can count on for anything outside of maybe some special teams play. Very much a developmental player. So that's really half a secondary. And that's all you have back there. Now, Jamel Dean coming back, you have 3 out of 4 positions above average to very good. Carlton Davis, Antoine Winfield, Jamel Dean. All very good players. I don't think I'd put any of them as elite players, maybe great players, but they're all very good. There's not a weak link in that group. Now, instead of having to replace 2 starters, you really only have to replace 1. And, maybe 2 if you talk, strong safety and nickel. Yeah, that's 2 positions, and a lot of time they're both starting positions. But you could also get a guy who does some of both. We saw Antoine Winfield play some safety and some nickel last year, and I know that's not the direction the team wants to go this year, but there are safeties out there who will play a little bit of both. And you talk about the draft, a guy like Brian Branch. He is a tackling machine. He can play the nickel. He can play over the top. He is a Swiss Army knife. So I think he was already someone who was high on the Bucs board. And now he's going to be even higher because he's kind of the perfect fit for what the Bucs need. He would be a first-round pick, and he's really the weak link in that group. And I think he's going to be a really good pro. I think eventually he'll be one of the better safeties in the league. So to add a guy like that to what they have coming back now with 2 high-end corners and a high-end safety, that makes a secondary. And even if it's a lesser player, or they have to kind of do some patchwork, they bring in, just kind of a journeyman guy to fill the strong safety role. Maybe a Khalid Hudson who played some strong safety and played some linebacker in Washington. And he's just, kind of a part-time player. He's a run defender, he's a box enforcer, and gets a little bit of play and coverage. And then you get a nickel in the draft. That's a very feasible plan. There's nothing crazy about that. You can do that in a way that's cost effective, and your defense in the back end still looks really good. So the Jamel Dean signing was every bit as unexpected as it was important for this defense. And it makes me really optimistic about what next season looks like. This was a team that was full of holes to the point that there was no way they could fill them all in the draft. And just like that, out of nowhere, they patched one of their biggest ones. So that was an incredible re-sign by Jason Light and the Bucs. And, after that, you thought it was done. They got their big guy. They spent their money. They got a young player who's in his prime, and it's time to say goodbye to a guy like Lavonte David. He's going to have a lot of suitors in free agency. He might want to go to a contender here at the back end of his career. He's still playing at a really high level. He's going to get paid, and you just spent what cap room you had on Dean. Well, today we found out Lavonte David also coming back. Again, completely unexpected. You felt like if you got one of those 2 guys, it would be a really successful offseason. But to get both of them was shocking. Absolutely shocking. And I am so happy. I'm more happy that David is coming back than I am Dean, even though I think Dean is a more important player for this defense, especially when you consider their ages. But getting Lavonte David back, he is the face of Buccaneers football for the last decade. He's a future Hall of Famer. He's still playing really well. He's the captain of the defense. He's one of those guys you really wanted to see as a Buccaneer for life. And right now, that is still intact. He's back on a 1-year contract, $7 million, which was well below what I expected him to get. He is someone who a lot of people thought would be in that $10 million range, maybe up to $12 million on a 1-year deal. A missing piece for a defense who's trying to get over the hump. So to get him at $7 million, that was just incredible work, incredible negotiation by this front office. And again, it patches a huge hole because you thought it was going to be just Devin White returning. Lavonte was going to be gone. Behind him are guys like KJ Britt, who I think he's kind of shown what he is. I don't think he's a starter in this league. Really, I don't even think he's a high-end backup. So with him looking like your in-house solution, that was not looking good. That was another need you were going to have to fill in the draft or on the cheap in free agency with a guy like Drew Tranquill, who I don't mind as a player, but he's no Lavonte David. So getting that experience, that leadership, that talent back at that price point, and to fill another one of your biggest holes on defense, a huge addition, a huge signing. Those are your top 2 free agents hitting the market, and you got them below expected value. Now you're returning most of a defense that was really good, one of the top defenses in the NFL in terms of forcing 3 and out. And I think if they would have been one of the top defenses overall, if the offense could have helped them out even a little bit instead of just marching them back on the field over and over again. So I feel really good now about what this Bucs defense is returning Where a week ago, I felt like this was looking like a Swiss cheese roster. Holes at tackle, holes at defensive tackle, corner, linebacker, quarterback, all over the place. Now it seems manageable. Now it seems even if you just get a defensive tackle in the draft, you get them first, second round, this defense feels like it's ready to roll. You can patch that strong safety spot. You can talk about getting an edge rusher at some point in the draft, even though they brought back Anthony Nelson. I'd still think they're going to prioritize pass rusher. This defense is actually looking like it's in pretty good shape. There are holes. They need to be filled. And I think they're going to make another free agent signing in the secondary. I think they're going to have more of a veteran presence coming back. I'd like to see it be Logan Hall or Logan Ryan, because I thought he did a really nice job with this group last year. I saw him talking up Jamel Dean on Twitter and talking about how hard he's worked and how much he's grown, how he deserved that contract. It seems like there's a real connection between him and the Bucs. He wasn't one of those, Brady bandwagon ring chasing kind of guys. That would have show. Now there are safe role. There are that nickel corner. Even if that's better. The Bucs signing punch. But in terms of quarterback play, I think he can be serviceable. I don't think he's ever going to live up to that number one overall pick status. I don't even think he's as good as a guy like Jameis Winston, who was also a number one pick who kind of washed out. Now, there's a reason Baker Mayfield's on his fourth team in the last year. It was Cleveland. Much that Baker as much as field. He was still short ball. Baker had, we're going to confuse him. He throws it with velocity. If you need a thread the needle kind of pass 15 yards downfield, he can do that. He has the arm strength for that. This isn't Cooper Rush, who was an option some people talked about. He isn't a guy like even Brett Rippon, who was another free agent name out there who was a low-level guy. Baker Mayfield has more talent than that. And he has more athleticism than that. He's actually a sneaky good runner. And I don't think they're going to do a lot of designed runs for him. This is not Lamar Jackson. Do not confuse it for a second. But if you leave the middle of the field wide open, he can step up, tuck the ball, and gash you for 10, 15, 20 yards. He's not afraid to do that. In fact, I don't really feel like he's afraid of anything. He will air it out. He will run it. He will take hits. He will hang in the pocket. which can be good and bad. And you like the good, and I worry about the bad. Maybe a little too careless with the ball. But in this new Dave Canales, aka Sean McVay system, where they're going to ask him to be more of a point guard, maybe check it down a little bit more, be a little bit more conservative with the ball. We know Todd Bowles is a conservative coach. That might protect Baker a little bit from himself, while him still having the ability to throw it downfield to a Mike Evans, who you know is going to be open deep this year. It's going to take shots to whatever speed element the Bucs have. Maybe they bring back Scotty Miller as a 5th or 6th wide receiver. He will take a shot to a guy like that, if not him. He will make those gotta-have-it kind of throws, and some of them might turn into turnovers, but some of them will turn into big plays. And you need a little bit of that risk factor, which is part of why I liked Jameis Winston's game. I thought he had bonehead turnovers, which are unacceptable, but there are also calculated risks, which I'm comfortable with. And Baker has a little bit of that. Maybe more than a little bit of that. Which will be, in some ways, a breath of fresh air for this offense, which felt very stale, very dink and dunk last year. So I think between Baker Mayfield being, in my opinion, a clear upgrade over Kyle Trask, and I think Trask will get his chance to compete for that job, but I think Baker's going to win it, and I think he's going to win it comfortably. As much as I don't think Baker's a great quarterback, I think he's much better than Kyle Trask. And if Kyle Trask wins the starting job, I think that's reason to have confidence in Kyle Trask. But I don't have confidence in Kyle Trask at this point. I've got to be completely transparent. I have zero confidence in him as an NFL quarterback. So I think Baker's going to win that job pretty comfortably. And if he can just be a game manager, if he can be a bridge quarterback, he's on a 1-year contract. He's got to show something. He's got to prove himself. And if he doesn't, he's out of here. So if he can do that, it'll be beneficial for him. It'll be beneficial for the Bucs. It'll be beneficial for Todd Bowles, Dave Canales, everyone involved. Him, having a bounce back year. I think that's good enough for the Bucs to win the division. And this is going to be a better division this year. The Saints got Derek Carr. I think that's a big upgrade for them at quarterback. They've lost a lot as well, so I don't think they'll be a great team. But I think they'll be okay. The Falcons, I really like what they've done in free agency. I think they're going to be better. And the Panthers, they're adding a new coaching staff who I think on paper looks really good. They've made a lot of really nice signings so far, and they have the number 1 overall pick. So you expect them to get a guy like CJ Stroud or Bryce Young, who I think is going to be a really good player as a rookie. Either one of them. I've been really impressed from them. I think they're going to be day 1 starters, and I think they're going to be impressive. So I don't think this division will be as bad as it was last year. I don't think it'll be the top in the NFL by any means. But I think every team, barring maybe the Saints, have gotten better. And the Bucs are included in that. They're bringing back a lot of the same guys, but I think it's addition by subtraction at the offensive coordinator spot, and with some of these aging veterans who are trying to latch on for a ring. I think some young legs, some hungrier guys are going to pump some life into this roster. And we're going to see that in the draft, and we might see that with the quarterback. I mean, Baker Mayfield, he's a very fiery guy. There's hunger there. And I think that's going to be good enough. I think the roster is good enough. You still have a strong core: Vita Vea, Devin White, Carlton Davis, Antoine Winfield, Tristan Wirfs, Ryan Jensen, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Russell Gage. This is a good roster. It has holes. It's not a great roster. I'm not calling them a Super Bowl contender. But I think they can win the division, and depending on their matchup, I think they can compete in the playoffs. You just have to get hot at that point. So this has been a wildly successful free agent period so far. And I'm sure they're not done. There are holes to fill. There are moves to be made. I mean, we just need bodies on this roster, frankly, because a lot of guys are still free agents. You know, Mike Edwards, Sean Murphy-Bunting. You know, who's your left tackle? There's still a lot to figure out. So I think the Bucs will be very active in the second wave of free agency. I think they're going to be looking for those bargain bin kind of free agents. You know, a depth edge rusher maybe, or what you perceive as a backup offensive tackle, because they're probably going to get their starting left tackle or starting right tackle in the NFL draft. I think that's going to be their high priority early on. So at this point, they've already made their big splashes with Dean, with Baker, and with Lavonte David. Two of those guys are high-level defenders, and you got a quarterback upgrade. Next is just going to be filling it out. So, again, this is an incredible first 3 days of free agency. Could not have asked for more. Cannot give enough credit to Jason Light and the front office. This team went from reload/rebuild, a lot of conversation about Caleb Williams tanking in the NFL draft. And now there's reason to believe they'll win the division. They'll be a playoff team again. And they didn't break the bank to do it. They got good deals, good value. You can't ask for anything more. This was a best case scenario. So we'll see who they add on the secondary market. We'll see what other names are floating around there. There are a few guys I like. I mentioned Khalid Hudson. I think he can be a really good special teams player, can fill two positions, linebacker and safety, in terms of depth. I don't think he's a starter by any means. So we'll see. We'll see who is left after this kind of dust settles. You know, we were in a wait-and-see phase last week, and we waited, we saw, and the Bucs made big moves. Now they have to supplement. They have their foundation. They have their future. Jamel Dean's a guy who's going to be here for 4 more years. You're going to get his prime of his career. He's a guy who can help you win a Super Bowl. Lavonte David, he makes your defense really good still. He's the captain. He's the guy with the green dot. He calls the plays. He's the mastermind in the middle. He makes everyone around him better. This defense, it's going to be good next year. And I wasn't sure of that a week ago. This was going to be a big-time prove-it year for Todd Bowles because he was going to have to make magic happen. He was going to have to make wine out of water. Now he's got a little bit more to work with. Be ready. This Buccaneers season is going to be interesting. I think adding some of these younger pieces, bringing back some of these veterans, this is going to be a fun year. It's going to be a fun division race. I think last year was so frustrating because the expectation was to run away with this division. And they didn't. They sputtered, they stumbled, they struggled when there was no reason to with the roster they had. The roster's changed. The roster has lost some talent. And that's okay because they're still very talented. But I think the expectation has gone down. Instead of a 13-win season, we might be hoping for a 10-win season. That might be good enough to win the division. So I think this is going to be a more enjoyable season. I think it's going to be a more fun season, especially when you talk about the offense, Dave Canales, Baker Mayfield. It's going to be more interesting for me instead of more frustrating like it was last year. So, good start. I'm really happy with where they're at. We will be back next week. Hopefully, Garrett will be back on schedule with us. We'll talk more about the next wave of free agents they add, what they're going to bring to the team, what we expect from this team, and we're going to start ramping up our draft coverage. Now that we have a more clear understanding of what the roster is going to look like, what the needs are, we can really start going more in depth with what prospects we're looking at. Offensive tackle, defensive tackle, Safety. Those are looking like the big needs right now. Edge rusher, I think, will be a high priority. And we'll talk about the guys like Will McDonald, who's a guy I really like if he can be there in the second round. We're going to really get a chance to talk about this roster, talk about how to add to this roster and how to strengthen this roster to make it a contender. Because as it is right now, I think there may be one or two really good drafts away. You get 3 starters in this draft, you get 2 or 3 starters in the next draft, or starter level caliber players. Then you're talking a contender again. It's not that far off. This is step 1 of getting back. This is step 1 of the reload. Bringing your own guys back. Jamel Dean, Levante David. That's part of your reloading process. They're here. David for 1 year, but Dean for 4. You can win a Super Bowl 4 years from now. So, until next week, I am JT Olson. You can find all my written work at bucsreport.com. Thank you for turning into our podcast here at the Around the Block Network. And until we meet again, go Bucs.